Hello, everyone. My name is Deb Hodgson from Stratham, New Hampshire. I'm one of the co-founders of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Jen White and Lori Schreier, who's also here with us today. I first got involved 5 years ago when I realized wireless was affecting me. All sorts of health reasons that improved once we hardwired our house. Then contacted my state rep, who passed the bill in New Hampshire for the commission, met Jen and Lori and Cece, and we've been on this wild ride ever since. So thank you all so much for being here with us today. Bear with me with my stuffy voice. And Lori, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Hi, my name's Lori Schreier. I live in Westmoreland, Southern New Hampshire. I got involved quite a number of years ago when I borrowed a friend's tri-field meter and found out that there were high magnetic fields in my house that were from stray currents coming off of the pole. So that's a little different than the wireless radiation, but it's still a concern that was then addressed, thank goodness. So I got more and more involved and got meters for myself and started measuring things and hardwired my computer, which has pretty much always been that way. And I so glad to have met Cece and Deb and Jen and been involved with the New Hampshire Commission following what they did, all those meetings, and got involved with Keene, trying to help them create an ordinance that would be safer for the residents. They didn't quite get there, but did educate some people about the concerns with EMFs. And interestingly, just today, yesterday, on my Facebook page, people are talking about how wireless cell phone companies are approaching homeowners to install cell towers on cell tower on someone's property in my town. And there was a lot of discussion about it. And my town does have an ordinance limiting cell towers to forestry residential districts with under a special exception. So she actually did not agree to that, and hopefully other people won't. I mean, we do have some towers in town. We do have decent service in most places. And we also have fiber to the premises for people who want that. So my town has some good things, but we have to constantly be vigilant because of things that come up all the time with these companies trying to sell more products and make more money, even when we don't really need the service. So. Anyway, you'll learn a lot today. So welcome, Cece. I think Cece has a very long bio, and we decided today she would just briefly introduce herself. Cece Doucette is really the energy behind a lot of what we're doing in New Hampshire for Safe Tech and from Massachusetts for Safe Tech. And she just is always reminding us that we need to keep moving the needle forward, however slow that might be.
All right, Lori. Well, thank you so much to both you and Deb, and also Jen, who's not with us today, for all the incredible work you've been doing in New Hampshire and really leading the nation with the efforts that everybody's putting their energy behind. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and pull up my slides. Okay, Deb, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. And we will make these slides available following the presentation. They'll come out to you in the next day or so. And we'll include the video of today's presentation so that you can go back and refresh yourself on any points that you might have missed. And then also share this with others in your community so that your town too can build the kinds of protections that Lori spoke of for Westmoreland and that other towns are doing across the country. So this little MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University, where I also earned my bachelor's in communication studies. And I was a tech writer for a number of years, and now I never ever imagined this is what I'd be using that skill set for, but I'm really grateful to be able to do these communication forums and to do writing to submit, letters up to the EPA and the FCC and whatnot when those working at the federal level are asking us to do that. So I'm grateful for my skill set. And I first learned about this issue way back in like 2013, I think, when a girlfriend of mine at book group tipped us off that there could be something up biologically with wireless technology. She was an electrical engineer and was kind of systematically going through some health issues in her family and discovered a book by Anne Louise Gittleman called Zapped. And she told us about that book at book group. And I had spent many years bringing technology into my children's schools at the time when the industry was pushing in their 21st century classroom. So our poor little budget here in Ashland, Massachusetts couldn't afford all this new technology we were being told the kids would need to have to succeed. So I jumped in and helped to lead our local education foundation, and we got wireless infrastructure. We got funding for iPads and Chromebooks and minis and smartboards and what we thought was all this great new technology. Once Wendy tipped me off about the biological effects, I did the deep dive into the science, and I was astounded to find literally thousands of studies all over the country, all over the world, showing great biological harm from all of the wireless radiation we now are immersed in today. So it was not an easy conversation, but when I brought the facts to my schools, we became the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. Turn off wireless devices when not in use. Turn the Wi-Fi on, like the routers and access points, only when needed, and always place a mobile device on a solid surface, not on your body. So we became the first to adopt this in 2014. And then I went and I spoke with my legislators to say, hey, I think we've got a big problem here. Is there something from where you sit that we could at least give the public the right to know that there are serious harms with wireless technology? And so my senator, Karen Spilka, who is now our Senate president here in Massachusetts, and unfortunately doesn't introduce bills anymore, but back in 2014, she put me with a lawyer in her office, and we crafted together a bill that would simply form a commission and bring the right minds together at the state level, look at this issue, and then decide what needs to be done. So we've been working on bills here for pretty much going on a decade. And then we had the same conversations because Deb spoke to her legislator. She introduced me to him. They came down to my kitchen table here in Massachusetts. And for the afternoon, we helped Representative Patrick Abrami connect the dots on what this radiation issue means. And we'll be happy to share with you a slide to tell you what we did in New Hampshire. So very grateful for that. And then on this journey, I've been so honored to directly connect with many of the world's leading scientists and doctors. They are very accessible. They all want the same thing: excellent technology without radiating ourselves and our planet. So we have established a little nonprofit. It was initially out of the UK, now it's out of Canada. And we have built the education training component. So we have online resources, or we can train schools and families and corporations literally in a half an hour, like on your lunch hour, and administer that training across the board, give a certificate of completion so that you can turn it into your compliance office. So we are solutions-based, right? My poor mom, she raised 10 kids, and you can't do everything for everybody when you have that many kids. So she taught us, if you identify a problem, be darn well sure you're part of the solution. So thank you, Mom, rest in peace, but your legacy continues here. And so we have this amazing training already built. And as we were raising this issue in Massachusetts, I was fortunate to connect with others. You know, I was my own lone voice for 2 years when I fell down the rabbit hole on this. And then Dr. Deborah Davis of the Environmental Health Trust, Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada, Dr. R.S. Sharma from India, and Janet Newton from the EMR Institute and Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair, who's a psychologist, they all came to our state house to ask our legislators for right to know legislation. That was back in 2016. And at that meeting, I was able to walk into a room at our state house, standing room only. And it was so gratifying because everybody there knew about this issue. I was no longer just one single voice that was so easily swept under the rug. So when we connected, after a couple of years, we founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and we've got a wealth of resources out there for you. We try and position it in a way that's welcoming and inviting, lots of white space, but to the point, and summarizing what we've done in our state and resources for anybody to use from wherever you are. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked me to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference back in 2018. And I like to include this link because once you have our slides, you can go in and look at this link. And our talks at this national conference were held to about 10 minutes or less. So it's quick and easy, highly credible facts and videos to share with others as you try to open this conversation credibly where you are. So feel free to use that. And then I was honored to help plan and deliver the EMF medical conferences. And I was asked to speak on state and local policy. So there are 24.5 continuing medical education credits available to doctors. And Libby Kelly, who organized this conference, went the extra mile to get the separate accreditation process for nurses. And we should know that our firefighters need to have continuing education credits too. And they're very grateful to know about this medical conference because they are first responders in our communities. And this conference, because of the pandemic, had to go to an online platform. So now anybody can take this training from where they are. They don't have to have a travel budget. They don't have to pay to go to a conference. They can take this conference and get 24.5 CMEs for less than $100. And anybody in the public, anybody anywhere in the whole world can take this training. If you don't need the credits, you can enroll and register to license the videos for, I think it's just $39. So amazing opportunity to learn directly from many of the world's leading experts on this topic. So that's how I got involved. So what caused my schools to even hang this little sign in our classrooms? I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So for anybody who's with us today that has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into settings. So if you don't have an iPhone, this fine print disclaimer is in all of our wireless products. You can just go online and put in your make and model and then type in RF exposure. But if you have an iPhone, from settings, scroll down and hit general. On a super old phone, you'd hit about, but most people have been talked into upgrading their phones by now. So from general, go all the way down to the bottom, or from about all the way down to the bottom, to legal and regulatory. And you can kind of remember this because this gal, if you remember GAL or just GL, this gal taught you how to find the legal fine print. So it's kind of a good little party trick as you're going out for the holidays. Hey, did you hear about what's going on with wireless? Let me show you in your phone. Once you're in legal and regulatory, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. And when we read this legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device away from the body. So if you're tucking your device in your bra, in your suit pocket, your shirt pocket, your waistband, your back pocket, or holding it in your hand, you are exceeding the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And guess what? Those limits were never tested for biological harm. They were just tested for heat. So the regulations that we've been stuck with since 1996 say, okay, if you put a cell phone up here, how much heat does it take to raise the temperature of your skin? Well, as we'll see in a few minutes, it has nothing to do with heat. We have very serious consequences happening at the non-heat, non-thermal non-ionizing, low-level radiation exposure levels. So in our world of wireless radiation, we use a number of different terms. Technically, it's called radio frequency microwave radiation. We also use the term EMF for electromagnetic fields, and that's these spiked erratic pulsations of microwave radiation that are coming off of all of our devices. So that's about as technical as we'll get, but we just want you to know that these things all add up to man-made wireless radiation. And in the scientific literature, there is no safe level. So the end game is to reduce it as much as we possibly can and have excellent connectivity, but without the radiation. And we know how to do that. So in that RF exposure fine print disclaimer, it tells us to keep a distance. And then in a subsequent paragraph, it says that if you want to be a little safer, use a hands-free option like speakerphone or the headsets that they often provide. But you got to be careful, because if you're plugging a wire into a radiating device, that's like a playground for wireless radiation. So if you're going to use a headset on a transmitting device, you want to be careful to get one that doesn't carry that radiation right up the wire and into your brain. And folks, there are solutions to everything. And we're so very grateful to the people who have created the hollow tube headsets. So this operates much like a doctor's stethoscope. So this would plug in to your radiating device, you know, just a little jack. And then it goes up, you've got audio controls, these little ferrite beads break the radiation, but the signal is still coming up, but it's through hollow tubes with nothing but rubber that connects to your head. So you'd want to set the phone as far away from you as you possibly could, and use it for only a short amount of time as you can. And then do everything else from a landline or from your computer that's hardwired at home. So that's what the legal fine print has told us all along, but most of us had no idea this has been buried in there from the get-go. This is a, you know, you can go to this See the Fine Print page and you'll find a brochure that has things saying like, look at the Apple iPads, right in it, they're saying seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And I know of children who had their first seizures while using a tablet. So this is happening in real time, folks. When I was running our local education foundation, I went after a grant in my town. And it was not easy because I had to get the education out there first. And it took me 3 tries to get a grant from our select board to put a wireless radiation detection meter on loan in our public library. So folks can just take it out and do their own gap analysis of this invisible toxin. And if the pandemic's taught us anything, it's that we need to be vigilant about these invisible exposures in our environment. So now anybody in my town can take out this acoustimeter for a week and go wherever they go, their home, their schools, their cars, their workspaces, their recreation places, their houses of worship, and just gather the data. Once you have the data and you know what you're up against, then we can teach you how to reduce those exposures. So we became the first in the nation to pilot this loaning of a radio frequency detection meter. And then at one of the medical conferences, I met Dr. Judy Safrier. And when we came back to Massachusetts, she and I went after a state level cultural council grant, and we got a meter put on loan in her public library in Newton, Massachusetts. And then out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon has put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood that caused so many people to get so sick that they've had to abandon their homes. Literally, children were vomiting in their beds at night. They were having skin issues, memory issues, headaches, nosebleeds, and the pollinators all disappeared. So this is not something to be taken lightly, but because the industry owns mainstream media, we don't hear about it. So that's why we're doing these education sessions twice a month, so folks have a safe, reliable place to go for the science and learn what others are doing for inspiration. So this is the safe, so this acoustimeter is the first one that we put on loan. At the medical conference several years later, they introduced the Safe and Sound Pro 2. Both of them are broadband radio frequency detection meters that go up to 8 gigahertz, and they're both great meters. This one is just a little more current technology, but they're both good. And I want to give you a demonstration now of just what we're up against with this technology. So I'll show you on the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. That's what many doctors are bringing into their medical practices to loan out to their patients. See how mine's in the green right here? That's what we're gunning for. In the scientific literature, they tell us that we should be under 10. Right now, I'm at 2.7. So the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So in, like 3 feet of air, how much radiation is there? We want to be under 10 in our indoor spaces. So to give us a reality check, I do keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. I'm going to take it out of airplane mode with the antennas radiating, and we're going to see where we went. We were around 3, right? I'm not doing anything. This is just the multiple antennas in my cell phone looking to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. So I'm choosing not to radiate myself, and I'm going right back into airplane mode. And you can see that as it dissipates through the air, we go right back down into the green mode. So where were we? Just under 3. Turning on my cell phone sent us to 1,250,000 microwatts per square meter. That's over 1 million. And the science indicates we should be at 10 or less, not 10,000, just 10. So this is what we're up against. But as I said, there are solutions for safe technology everywhere. So let's first look at the science. If anybody's interested, my local cable station was so gracious to send resources to my house. Use your local cable stations. They are just like the last bastion of independent reporting. And they have posted a 23-minute public service announcement where I did a walkthrough of my home that shows common exposures in all of our houses today. And then I make suggestions for how to remediate. So feel free to use that. It's already helped like 10,000 people. So that makes us feel pretty good. But what does the science tell us? We'll look first at the long-term effects, and then we'll turn the page and go to short-term effects. So child and adult cancers. This document here is from our National Toxicology Program. It's available online. 2 decades ago, the National Toxicology Program was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration to look at cell phones and see if they could be harmful. So 20 years later, after they completed their studies, they came out with this report that shows clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other harms. Clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that they can assign. The industry, every time a good study comes out, will spin it and say, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more than one. Well, right as we published our NTP study results, Ramazzini Institute in Italy concluded another large study on the other end of it, on the cell towers, and found the same thing that we found here: cancers, DNA damage, and more. So we don't need more science. We can always improve on the knowledge that we have, but what we need is public policy and information to the public so we can make choices on how to use technology safely. So DNA damage is very well documented. And as we know, DNA is the roadmap to grow a proper anything, whether it's a child or a plant or a pollinator or any biological system. It was the infertility studies that I came across that got me on my feet, where they have taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or apoptosis, which I've learned is programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of exposure to this man-made microwave radiation. So I was like, you got to be kidding me. Our oldest daughter had just gone up to college with her MacBook, and our youngest had just gone into high school. And for Christmas, we gave her a laptop. And where are both my daughters using it, but right on top of their reproductive organs? And subsequent to when I first started learning about the infertility issues, Kaiser Permanente has come out with a study showing that pregnant women who are exposing their fetuses to radiofrequency radiation are also seeing damage to the children when they come out. So this is deadly serious, folks. Neurotoxicity. What we know through the scientific literature is we have something called the blood-brain barrier, and that is a membrane that's meant to shield our sensitive areas like the brain. There's also a gut barrier from toxins that would otherwise penetrate our sensitive organs. What the science is showing us is this constant spiked erratic pulsation of microwave radiation is penetrating or permeating or breaking that blood-brain barrier. So what used to be a protected area is now exposed to toxins, and toxins in the bloodstream that should be escorting out of the body can now take a turn into these sensitive areas. And we wonder why we have such an increase in neurotoxic diseases today. ADD, ADHD, Dr. Hugh Taylor at Yale, he runs the OBGYN program for Yale Medical. He has done rodent studies exposing the pregnant mice to radiofrequency radiation. And when the pups come out, they're in their cages bouncing off the walls, just like a child with ADD, ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. And Dr. Herbert sees huge connections between what we know happens with these environmental exposures, including wireless radiation, and what happens to the families in her care with autism. Dr. Martin Paul came out with a new paper this spring assessing all the studies that have been done on Alzheimer's, which, like cancers, used to take 20, 25 years to develop, and we didn't see so much of it until we got into our senior citizen years. Well, now, as Dr. Paul reports, we are seeing Alzheimer's at earlier and earlier, not just people in their 70s and 80s. Now it's 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in some rare cases, 20-year-olds are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. How long can we continue to pollute our brains with microwave radiation? We're so grateful when this begins to come mainstream, and a big shout out to our friends at the Environmental Working Group. As a mom, I first learned about their work on pesticides. They published the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, referencing what foods you should really try and buy organic and what foods you might be able to get away with doing commercial products because of how much pesticide is absorbed into the products that you're feeding yourself and your loved ones. So Environmental Working Group is now putting resources toward educating the public on wireless radiation. And they have come out with one on children and how we need to protect children from radiation. And then they also have come out with one on neurotoxicity. So if that's a trusted resource for you, please feel free to go out and look at their fact sheets and share them with others, because we don't get this information in mainstream media. Now, children, as many of us have learned, are not just little people. Their very biological systems are still under construction. Their brains, their skulls, their hearts, their immune systems, their central nervous system, their DNA is still forming, and wireless radiation damages DNA. Dr. Om Gandhi did this modeling here to show these heads are turned sideways in this modeling. If you put a cell phone up to the yellow part here, that's the ear. You put your cell phone up to your head while it's transmitting, and you are penetrating your brain about a third of the way through with microwave radiation. On a 10-year-old child whose skull is thinner than yours and mine, and whose brain has a higher water content than yours and mine, it's penetrating about 3/4 of the way into this child's brain. And on a 5-year-old, look at that. This microwave is pulsating through almost the entire child's brain. So these are not toys to be given to children. Never, ever give a child a radiating device, and be very mindful of who's around when you're using your radiating devices. Now, each one of these cell phones or tablets or wearables, each one typically has multiple antennas in them. There's a cellular data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, a hotspot antenna. And if you didn't know any better and started buying into what the industry is pushing for 5G, then you might have additional antennas for the millimeter waves for 5G. So again, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. Once you know this, why would we ever leave any of those antennas radiating, especially if we're not using them? So keep everything in airplane mode, turn each one off, and then only turn on the one antenna for only as long as you need it, and then go right back into airplane mode. So it's our duty to protect, especially our children. Now, in the short term, a lot of folks recognize what we're going to cover next. I wanted to let you know that since 2002, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the other groups within there who are responsible for offering accommodations in the workplace and so forth, the Jobs Area Network, for example, they have long since recognized electromagnetic sensitivities, or EMS. So we're not making this up, but we really need everybody's help in getting this out to the public. So what are some of the common early onset microwave radiation sickness symptoms? Insomnia is huge. And time and again, after somebody comes and learns about this with us, they'll come back and say, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to believe it, but I recognize some of these symptoms. And we're like, well, join the club. None of us ever imagined this is where our time would need to go, but here we are. But they'll come back and say, I shut everything off last night, and oh my gosh, I slept for the first time in ages, right? So it can be that simple. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches. My own daughter, when she was in high school, got a migraine. What child should be getting a migraine, right? She was getting nosebleeds as well. And once I stopped circling my tail and finally decided, okay, Mom, it's time to step up. And one by one, I addressed every exposure in our home. Her headaches and nosebleeds all but disappeared, unless she would get dehydrated and then she might get one. But other than that, we created a safe sanctuary in our home. Chronic fatigue. So our poor cells only have so much energy. And that's pretty well calibrated to get us through our normal, everyday processes. And then when we sleep, as part of our circadian rhythm in the wee hours of darkness, our brain releases melatonin from the pineal gland. Melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep and helps to escort those toxins of the day out through the bloodstream. What the science is also showing us is that this constant bombardment of microwave radiation is a light energy form. So our poor brain thinks the lights are on and doesn't properly release the melatonin to regulate our body's sleep and cleanup mechanisms. So it's no wonder that we walk around just knuckle dragging, because people are so wiped out these days because they're not sleeping well. And with the headaches and the nosebleeds and pain from unidentified sources, there are skin abnormalities. We have like little antennas in the surface of our skin. So some people will talk about the hot ear after they've had a cell phone up to their head. Others will tell us about rashes or heating or flushing or tingling because it's doing nerve damage. So what we know scientifically, in addition to the little antennas in our skin, in addition to the microwaves opening up the blood-brain barrier, we also know there's something called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, I remember it because it sounds kind of like the candy Rolos when I was little, those little stacks of caramel chocolates that were Rolos. Well, that's what's happening with the rouleau effect on our red blood cells. Remember, these are electromagnetic fields of man-made energy. What happens when we magnetize our red blood cells? Well, they start stacking up like a roll of coins or a roll of Rolos. And then they're no longer free floating to bring oxygen to all of our systems, which is vital. So now we've got this rouleau effect going on, and our cells are getting oxygen deprived, and our doctors recognize it as oxidative stress. So anytime we have oxidative stress, that's the precursor, one of the major precursors for chronic illnesses. So we now know scientifically so many mechanisms of harm for why we need to clear this man-made radiation out of our spaces. It can cause our heartbeats to go too fast or too slow. Again, these are electrical organs, and we are imposing this man-made electromagnetic pulsation that's dysregulating our own very well calibrated heartbeat, brain. You know, we do the EEGs, we do the EKGs to monitor these natural waves in our bodies, these communication signalings, and this electrosmog that we've immersed ourselves in unwittingly is dysregulating that. For some people, the heart goes too fast or too slow, depending on your own proclivity. And then cognitive impairment. You know, it used to be as we get older, we'd get a little forgetful, and that's normal as our body begins to age. But now we're seeing kids with cognitive impairment, and we're radiating our kids 24/7 until we learn enough to feel confident to make choices to stop it and to just have excellent technology without the radiation. It was really unsettling at the EMF medical conferences to hear the experts tell us that we can anticipate seeing many more of these anger outbursts in our societies like we've seen with these mass shootings and other out-of-line behavioral issues, because we are polluting the brain, and all those areas where we used to know to make good decisions are being impacted by microwave radiation. So anxiety and depression, we are literally at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression. And what can we expect if we keep microwaving the brain? So it's not just you and I, it's every living biological cell on the planet, from our pollinators to our birds. They have magnetite and other mechanisms in their brains and in their beaks that keep them in synchronicity with the Earth's natural electromagnetic field, which is 7.83 hertz. So that's like cycles per second, 7.83. When we're talking about man-made technology in the megahertz range, that's 1,000,000 cycles per second. Gigahertz is 1,000,000,000 cycles per second going bam, 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 just jackhammering us with microwave radiation. The Earth is 7. That's what we need to get our bodies back in sync with. For those concerned with, but for the birds and the pollinators, it's dysregulating their navigation systems where they can't get to where they need to be. They can't find their way back to the hives. So this is a huge contributor to what's happening with our colony collapses with the bees, etc. Those concerned with climate change should know that as far back as 2012, a Greenpeace analyst indicated that if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was 10 years ago. And look at everything we've layered on with more and more man-made microwave radiation. Mineral extractions, data warehouses, networks, all of this, we just need to learn, what are we doing and how can we fix it? Every time we are using our personal devices, streaming, sending and receiving, charging and recharging, we're all using energy that we're not even thinking about. And all the apps that we've been sweet talked into putting on our devices are perpetually back there doing all of this updating, using energy all the time, unless we choose to disable those and only turn them on when you or I need to use them, and preferably through a hardwired connection. And when we say hardwired, it's not rocket science, folks. On the back of your router, there are Ethernet ports. All you need to do is plug an Ethernet cable in. and run it to wherever you're using your technology. And for most of our devices, you can buy little adapters to plug in to the other end of the Ethernet cable. Who knew? This is like a $30 adapter for an iPhone. You can forward your phone calls to your landline. If you got rid of your landline, that could be a decision you could revisit. You can forward cell phone calls to the landline when you're not on the go. And anything else that you're doing on your device, you can pretty much do it through a cabled connection when you're not on the go. So solutions abound, everybody. I know it's a lot to think about. And when I fell down the rabbit hole, I was over here scratching my head going, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. If this is as bad as what little me could find in the science all on my own, why don't we know about this? Then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came out with this amazing report. It's free and online, called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And that's where we've been for the last couple of decades. There's always hope that new blood will come in and start protecting the public instead of corporate interests. So Captured Agency is a very credible resource to show this revolving door at the FCC. And then ProPublica just came up with an article in November echoing the same facts and some new ones since 2015, how the FCC shields cell phone companies from safety concerns. That's an excellent article that's getting a lot of traction. And they feature some of the work that's going on in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon made so many people so sick. And I'll send the link in with this when I send my slides. So remember that $30 million study that the FDA commissioned with the National Toxicology Program? That should have triggered public protections and public policy when their report said clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, but it didn't. So now you have to look at who's the players today at the FDA. All the ones back 20 years ago are long gone or dead. And nobody in our federal agencies have the expertise for biologically assessing radiofrequency radiation. The gentleman in charge of the FDA's radiation area today is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when folks look into his background, you will find that he is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and big pharma and big agri and, you know, all these environmental polluters. So we have serious conflicts at the federal level. There are some very important inroads being made through other groups right now. So, you know, kudos to everybody who's taking the time to get this right. But we cannot expect to just say, oh, somebody's got to come fix this for us, because there is nobody coming to your rescue. You have to learn about it. You have to fix what you can fix. And then the things that you can't fix, you need to start talking to your town and your legislators about. So I've been in more than one meeting when somebody went online as I was giving the facts and they start fact checking me and they go, well, look, the World Health Organization says there's no problem here. Well, it's not easy to find, but if you know which links to actually go to, you will see that the World Health Organization has reopened their investigation into wireless radiation. Back in 2011, they already classified this as a group 2B possible human carcinogen in the same category as lead and thalidomide and chloroform and a whole bunch of other chemicals. But when you do a simple search, there is corruption at the World Health Organization. There's two groups there working on this. One is very industry backed, and that's why when you do a search, the first thing that pops up is some flimsy assurance that, oh, no problem here, keep doing what you're doing. But then there's this other group of highly qualified doctors and scientists who are there trying to inform public policy, but they're up against the industry corruption. So just know that the WHO has reopened their investigation, and we're waiting to see if this is going to get stacked with industry reps or whether they will select non-industry funded scientists and doctors whose life's work is microwave radiation. So no cavalry coming. So let's see what you and I can do. Here's the good news. Like I said, look at the back of your router, plug in Ethernet cables and run them to wherever your technology is. Most of us have multiple devices now, so you can get a little Ethernet switch. The beauty of this is when you plug the Ethernet cable into your router and then you plug it into the switch, you can then plug additional items in. And every one of these ports gives you this direct connection right to the internet. So you're not competing for bandwidth like you do with a wireless system. You get a far superior connection. It's more reliable. It's screaming fast. Wireless is crummy technology that we've been sold on, but it's lousy technology. And then you just get these little adapters like the Lightning adapter for the iPhone. You can find other adapters for other brands. And then just forward your cell phone calls to your landline when you're not on the go. Same thing for your tablets, you know, your MacBooks, your iPads, all of that can very easily be adapted with, this is the Lightning adapter for the MacBook. You can get the same little, you know, $12 to $30 adapters for the Chromebooks, etc. And then you just go into each device and turn off each of those antennas. And you do the same thing in your router, so you're not pulsing it throughout the house. So this first step is simple and inexpensive hardwiring setup. When my daughter was in college, I sent her a care package that cost me like $100. And I gave her a 50-foot Ethernet cable because the router was in their living room in their off-campus apartment. And then I gave her a roll of tape to tape it down so there's no tripping issues. So she taped it through the kitchen, through the living room, through the hallway, and into her bedroom, where she hooked up her iPhone and her MacBook using this, you know, configuration here. And she sent me a video to show that it was all done, because we learned from some of our school educators, trust but verify, right? So she was wonderful to send me a video. So you just turn off the antennas, and then you do have to measure, because with 5G or 5th generation and the Internet of Things, they want to connect you to everything that you buy. They want to put these radio frequency antennas in every electronic device so they can track your data and sell it to third-party vendors or more nefarious reasons that we won't go into here. So do what you can do today to control the devices under your own control. There's 3 areas that you may not have control over. The utility smart meters for gas, water, electric, solar, and propane. If it has an FCC ID number on it, that means it has a microwave radiation antenna in it, and it's pulsing all the time. The industry will tell you it just pulses for a couple seconds a day, which is not true because we've measured it. In my house, I measured what comes off of our electric meters. We have 2 because we have a solar system as well. And it pulsed 17,000 times a day right on the other side of my dining room wall. If that were my bedroom wall, this is what would happen. You would have somebody potentially sleeping right next to this microwave radiation all night long. And time and again, we hear of people getting so sick when those smart meters go in. The radiation likes metal, right? It likes to travel on metal. So if it's not properly grounded, or even if it is, the radiation itself can hop on the wires and the pipes of your home, turning your whole house into a giant microwave antenna. Far too many reports of improperly installed meters that cause fires and explosions. And like I said, there are data harvesting and privacy issues that come with this. They're capturing your data and selling it. And then at the medical conference, we were told that these smart meters are one of the leading causes of sudden onset microwave sickness. So you need to find out what your town has and start working with your town to say, we deserve to have these things hardwired directly to the home's internet so that, you know, they can take your readings and know when the service goes down. But they don't need to be radiating you to get that data. And this is a huge environmental justice issue. Here in Worcester, Massachusetts, National Grid rolled out the Smart Grid pilot program, which went way over budget. There was a lot of fraud going on with that, but they were putting these smart meters on people's homes without informed consent, and people were getting sick. And then the industry turns around and says, hey, look how great we did in Massachusetts. Now we're gonna, you know, roll it out all over the state. Or now, hey, New York, hey, Rhode Island, look how great this pilot program was in Massachusetts. Now we're going to bring it to your state. So this is happening all over the country, folks. So we need to be on our toes with these smart meters. This is a really good training resource. Jeremy Johnson, Silicon Valley engineer, did an excellent TEDx talk about what happened to him and his wife, who's a medical doctor. So we have a Silicon Valley engineer and a medical doctor who got so debilitatingly sick and didn't know why. And it turned out a bank of smart meters went in on their condo. So Jeremy gives an excellent talk here about how to welcome people into this conversation and what to do about it. So smart meters we may not have control of. You need to talk to your towns and find out what's going on and start working towards safe solutions. The second one is cell towers. So if you go to this link, this is my personal research repository called Understanding EMFs. And if you go to the resources page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, you can always find these links here. But it's critical to look at the non-industry funded science. What are the epidemiological studies telling us? Those are the ones that take a look at what's really happening in our society. And then what are the lab studies telling us as well? They're telling us that we should never, ever have these cell towers within 500 meters or 1,640 feet. There's a death slope and a neurotoxicity slope that inside this slope, we see elevated levels of death and neurotoxicity and other biological risks that we discussed. The curve starts to come down at this 500 meter mark. It doesn't actually catch up to general population statistics until double that at like 3,000 feet. So, but at least if we could get these things at least pushed out 1,600 feet from our homes and our schools and our places of worship and our playing fields and our senior centers, it would be a good start. But where there are vulnerable subpopulations like children, pregnant women, fetuses, the elderly, and anybody with any kind of an existing health condition, the science indicates we should be at least at a half a mile away from these. But even that, we need to be careful with what we talk ourselves into, because there is no safe level of microwave radiation identified in the scientific literature, but distance is definitely your friend. You can go to a website called antennasearch.com and see where many of these big macro cell antennas and towers are mounted. And this is what your return search might look like. I put in the State House address for Massachusetts. I did this a couple of years ago. It usually gives us a 3-mile radius. And at that point, there were so many polluting our downtown Boston area, it would only return a 1-mile radius. Within 1 mile of our State House, where our legislators go to work every day, 70 cell towers. How many antennas though? Tower is just a piece of metal, but how many antennas are radiating us? 1,184 of these giant antennas constantly pulsing radiation. Very toxic in our big cities today. And now add the 5G small cells. So 5th generation is what 5G refers to. It comes after 3rd and 4th generation, or 3G and 4G. And the industry is spinning it up that we're going to have these incredible fast download speeds for entertainment. We're going to have smart cities and super highways. Well, that all sounds really fun and great, but it's toxic. And look, who's buying up the entertainment industry? It's the telecoms and their parents. That's a new revenue stream for them. We don't need faster speeds. We need to hardwire our connections and get screaming fast speeds, not more wireless infrastructure. So 5G doesn't replace 3G and 4G. 5G, so we have something called the electromagnetic spectrum. That talks about how fast these waves are coming at us and how long each of the wavelengths are. Well, we've pretty much maximized all the money that can be made because they've used up all the spectrum of the longer wavelengths that carry your 3G and 4G signals. All that's left are these dinky little millimeter waves. And they're saying, ooh, it can carry vast quantities of data, but the catch is that it can't carry it very far. So the industry's solution is to partner all these different frequencies together from 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G, put them all together. And because these small ones can't go very far, they want to put a cell tower at curb height inside our neighborhoods, right outside our bedroom windows, every 2 to 12 houses. That's what 5G is. And this illustration from our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology shows what some of these things look like that are obvious. In other ways, they're hiding them behind buildings, or they're making them look like fake trees, which bring a whole new environmental pollutant because of the nanoparticles of all the plastics that break down from those fine trees that they're putting up. So another big issue is that they come in because anything that gets in the way of these millimeter waves will cause interference. So they literally have been known to come in overnight and just clear cut and lop off trees, which is so bad for our communities. So yeah, the kicker is at this congressional hearing with Senator Richard Blumenthal in a commerce hearing in DC. He said to two industry leaders, he said, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in independent scientific investigation of 5G before bringing it to market? And they hemmed and hawed and then finally admitted they don't know of any safety testing that was done. So that's a good 4-minute clip from our friends at Environmental Health Trust. Computer World and others are already reporting that 5G is a big joke. It's a great revenue stream for them. They can sell you something new, but it's not even living up to the speeds that they're promising. They're not getting anything better than what we already have with toxic 4G signals. But here's Verizon. In January, they put out a press release. Woohoo, we're giving 100 million people 5G. Okay, now this is not a popular subject, but I follow the science, and this is what the science is telling us. In the cities that have allowed 5G in, Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown are showing through this very heavily scrutinized and peer-reviewed paper evidence for a connection between COVID-19 and exposure to radio frequency radiation from wireless communications, including 5G. And once you know the science, that makes perfect sense because our biological cells only have so much energy. When you are constantly battling microwave radiation, your battery's starting to run low. And then you introduce a virus on top of it. What has your body got left to fight that with? This radiation is an immunosuppressant. We are damaging our immune systems. So it makes sense that we can't also fight off a pandemic when it shows that. So let's remove the radiation and give our bodies a chance to recover and then fight off whatever comes our way through illness. Dr. Magda Havas recognizes that our governments have dropped the ball in large part. Most are not monitoring this cumulative exposure of all these devices, all these cell towers, all these antennas. So she has established the Global EMF Monitoring Project, and she's asking you and I to be her citizen scientists and to invest in one of these Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters and go out and take measurements in your community. And I know Lori and Jen and Deb and I have all done that in our communities. And then we entered the data into her database. And Dr. Havas now has this great map where we can say, can we brag about our communities? And she uses the acronym BRAG for this project. B stands for blackout. We are in big trouble. R stands for red. A is for amber. And G is for green. So if you're sick or you don't want to become sick, you want to try and find places where you're more in the green than the red and the black, right? So in our outdoor, indoors, we want to be under 10 microwatts per square meter. The scientists got together in Salzburg some years ago and said, even if we could get to 1,000 outdoors, that wouldn't be half bad. Again, no safe level, but at least outdoors, you're typically not just standing under the radiation like we are in our homes and with our personal devices. If you had 1,000 or less outdoors, that might be okay. If you have a safe place to go at home to repair during your circadian rhythm sleep cycles. So at the Salzburg conference, they said 1,000 or less. And what do things look like today? Again, 1,000 or less is okay. In Westmoreland, they're under that at their fire department. In Keene, New Hampshire, we're creeping into the yellow. In Nashua, we're in the red. In Concord, we're in the red. And we took these measurements during the pandemic where there were very few cars and very few pedestrians spraying by with their radiation. Stratham, New Hampshire, they tried to fight it, but ultimately the town backed down and allowed this big cell tower right on their main drag in Stratham. They're in the blackout zone. And then look at the North End in Boston. Anybody who's joined us in the North End know that this is where we have a lot of tourists down where our excellent Italian restaurants are and our Italian bakeries, big heavily trafficked tourist area. And look at this. Isn't that a pretty light post? It's a cell tower. These are 5G small cell antennas mounted right there at the curb where everybody's standing and waiting to get in line in these restaurants. So we need to keep these conversations going. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that whenever we make meaningful changes in our society, it generally comes through 3 channels. So first, the public becomes informed, and we engage together to bring the solutions forward. In this case, it's safe technology. It also goes through the courts, and we have some excellent progress to share with you there. And then public policy ultimately catches up to protect the public, in this case, over corporate profit. So we want to share all this good news with you, right? I know it's overwhelming to learn just how harmful we have allowed ourselves to be exposed to this toxin, but we're all working really hard. So for legal solutions, the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense and others sued the FCC. Remember that National Toxicology Program, $30 million, cancers, DNA damage. That should have triggered the FDA to tell the FCC to fix their public radiation exposure limits. Instead, Dr. Shuren from the FDA went to his friends at the FCC and said, nothing to look at here. We don't really believe that study. Go ahead, keep doing what you're doing. When the FCC confirmed that their 1996 levels of public radiation exposure are still valid, they filed that in something called the Federal Register. And when that determination hit the Federal Register, then the lawsuits began. So our friends at Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense and others around the country sued the FCC for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence entered into the public record. Guess what? They won their lawsuit. They presented the 3 judges in the 9th Circuit District in Washington, D.C., with 27 big fat binders of evidence of harm that is in our government's public record. And so these judges said to the FCC, well, show us your homework. How did you actually determine that the 1996 levels of exposure are safe when all this other evidence says it's not? And they did one of these and said, oh, the FDA said it was okay. So the judges said, where's the FDA's homework? And the FDA has none. Not one of our federal agencies has done the review of the full body of scientific evidence of harm. So they won the lawsuit, the battle. They won the battle, but not the war. They remanded it back to the FCC, which means they sent it back to the FCC to account for the vulnerabilities of children, elderly, the environment, and those who are already sick from this. We need protections. So that was a great victory on this lawsuit. The regulators versus FCC, these guys used to work for industry. They knew that on our phone bills, we've been paying for years to bring the right solution, which is hardwired fiber optics or high-speed cable right to the premises, where we can simply hook up inside and have really good technology. Well, these guys noticed the shell game that was going on. We paid all this money to do it right. They took that money and put it in their wireless bucket and had been funding all this toxic wireless infrastructure. So they took this to the courts too and sued the FCC. And now I believe our states can go back and recoup that money and get the right solution installed. And right now, there's a lot of money flowing into our states from the federal agency under the Broadband Act. And we need to make sure that that money is spent not on more wireless infrastructure to please the industry, but on hardwired technology to and through the premises. And it takes you and I to open this conversation with our towns. Murray versus Motorola, 2 decades ago, when the first brain tumors started showing up, people started suing the industry. And as the industry will do, they delay it in the courts. And right now, this Murray versus Motorola is under review in the courts right now because of the brain tumors. So our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology realize that all of this is going to take a lot of time. There's another mechanism that our government has to create an emergency to fix something. So they have a petition here that people can go out and sign to get the FDA to declare an imminent hazard with wireless technology. So please go look at that and sign on. And then we've got some really great things happening here in Massachusetts, not fast enough to help the people who are suffering today, but moving the needle in the right direction. We've been educating the Massachusetts Board of Health, and they have a set of legal guidelines that they've added 4 pages to about cell towers. So I think this is the first in the nation. You can take this to your state level Board of Health agency and say, hey, let's do what Massachusetts is doing. In Pittsfield, where Verizon turned that cell tower on and everybody got so sick they had to abandon their homes, their Board of Health got involved at the local level. And they are the first in the nation to stand by their citizens. They investigated. We don't take anybody's word on anything. They looked at the science, they spoke to the doctors, and they looked at what our state level Board of Health legal guidelines advise. And they wrote a cease and desist order and asked Verizon to come to the table and tell them why they should not issue this cease and desist to move that cell tower. And they can move it. It's on a property that has like 60 acres of land if they just move it to the other side. But the industry likes to take the path of least resistance and highest profitability. So instead of responsibly siting it on this piece of land that's owned by a commercial developer, they took the shortcut and broke through this neighborhood and put it right on top of this neighborhood because there was already electrical power and a road easily accessed there. So the industry will always take the path of least resistance, and we need to teach our towns that that is not acceptable. So for the first time in the country, a Board of Health issued a cease and desist. Verizon went to the federal court, the Supreme Court in Massachusetts, and said, oh, we want an injunction against, Pittsfield. We don't think it's legal what they're doing. Instead of backing up their Board of Health, which their town said, Board of Health, investigate this. The Board of Health investigated. They came out with this cease and desist order, and their town refused to back them up. Their mayor has not stepped up to back them up. Their city council has not stepped up to back up their own Board of Health that carried out their assignment to look at this issue. So there's a lot happening in Pittsfield right now. That when the town would not give their own Board of Health the financial resources to take this to court, a civil lawsuit has now been filed against the entire town, including, unfortunately, the Board of Health, because that's the way you have to do it. But there's a civil lawsuit. But to the town's credit, just in recent weeks, they had 3 petitions put forward by their city council, and all 3 petitions were voted. And this would reach out to their legislators and say, hey, we're drowning here. We need help. It would go to their federal delegates. It would go to the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards and the Massachusetts Association of Municipalities. So this is a beautiful role model for what our towns can do. And now that we have this information, we'll be sending it out as soon as we have confirmation that these petitions were sent out by Pittsfield's town leaders. We'll have that to share with you so that your town can come quickly up to speed and replicate what Pittsfield is doing. This is becoming an incredible case study to help all of us everywhere. And the folks who had to abandon their homes in Pittsfield, some of them moved to Lenox in subpar housing that they've had to fix up with whatever money they could scrape together. And now they're in Lenox trying to fix the zoning code in Lenox as well, because industry is in there trying to rewrite their bylaws to industry advantage and taking away the protections that already existed. So lots happening in the courts here in Massachusetts in 2015. For the first time in a federal court, they recognize you don't have to have heat to have harm. And this was precedent setting here in Massachusetts. California, a teacher became so sick when the industry pushed that core curriculum in and got all this wireless testing done with the kids. When all that got fired up, many people got sick. And this school, Los Angeles Unified School District, had promised this teacher accommodations, and then they backpedaled and reneged. So she had to take it through the courts, and they reaffirmed that, yes, Wi-Fi sickness is a disability. So this is happening as it has to happen through the courts, and there are lawsuits happening all over the world. The industry comes in and says, oh, nobody cares about this. It's just these people in your town. But that, again, is another packet of disinformation that they routinely give our towns. You have the facts here. So we talked about educating ourselves, fixing what we can. We talked about taking it through the courts. And now the third prong, as Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, is what can we do from a public policy perspective? We've been trying in Massachusetts for a decade. And as I mentioned, Deb mentioned this to her state rep, Pat Abrami, told him how sick she had become, the thousands of dollars she had to pay out of pocket before she could even figure out it was the radiation and then remediate. And I love the story that she tells. You know, her family's looking at her like she's got 3 heads, but her kids had given her a plant that sat in her kitchen doing basically nothing for a couple of years. When Deb removed the wireless radiation from her home, that plant grew like 2 feet in 2 months or something. I may have the numbers wrong, but that was eye-opening for her husband and children to go, whoa, Mom, maybe you're not crazy. So when Deb taught Rep. Abrami, who's an engineer and who had only been taught you have to have heat to have harm, he is what we all hope for our public servants to be, representing the public. Rep. Abrami went and looked at the science and had this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing here? And so Deb introduced me to Rep. Abrami. The two of them got in his car from New Hampshire, drove down to my house in Ashland, and that's when we spent the afternoon helping him to connect the dots on this issue. And then he wrote a really good bill with very pointed questions. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and others already recognized radio frequency man-made radiation as a world-leading risk? And they put exclusions in their policies. They don't cover for damages. So when our towns allow all this toxic infrastructure in, they very well may be left holding the bag for liability. Why does that legal fine print that we reviewed say to keep it off the body? Why is the FCC dropping the ball on this? And why do they allow 100 times more radiation exposure to the public than certain other countries do? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect of the dozens of devices that we've invited into our homes unwittingly, into our schools, into our workplaces, into our parks, into our towns? Why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Because with any toxin, the more dose, the greater the risk of harm. So Rep. Abrami introduced his bill. He asked us to come up and testify alongside the citizens who have been working so hard on this. Also, Frank Clegg, the retired president of Microsoft Canada, and Dr. Paul Heroux from McGill University. McGill is like the Harvard of Canada. And Dr. Heroux drove down from Canada and testified with us back in 2019. Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada, retired, flew in and testified with us. Rep. Abrami testified, and then the citizens. We got this through the House Science, Tech, and Energy Committee. It then went to the other side, to the Senate, with their Health and Human Services Committee, which was co-chaired by Dr. Tom Sherman, who was a co-sponsor of this bill. We got it through the Senate by testifying again, and then it went under Governor Sununu's pen. And within 7 months, we got a bill passed into law to do an independent investigation of the biological and environmental effects of today's wireless technology. They started out looking at 5G, but they quickly realized it's every man-made pulsation of microwave radiation that needs to be addressed. So they spent a year, even during the pandemic, investigating and holding up their charge through this law, House Bill 522. And at the end of the day, they published this amazing report that documents the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and several of our federal agencies. And they make 15 recommendations. And I love the way that Rep. Brahmi, who is the chair of this commission, he was elected by his peers. I love the way they set it up, because all you really need to do is read the first 17 pages to see what they found. They make their executive summary, they call out the industry, and they make 15 recommendations for how to go where we are, do our gap analysis, record what the exposures are, and transition to safe technology, hardwired to and through the premises, and get our federal delegates engaged in this to fix the broken laws that are allowing the industry to run rampant with this toxin. So, and a big, big shout out to Deb Hodgson, because she volunteered her time. And, you know, we can all be citizen volunteers. We can help our public servants get this right. So Deb took the minutes at every one of the 13 commission meetings, and then the minutes were voted on at subsequent meetings. And now this is our country's best document on what this issue is. It's the first time a government entity has looked at this issue top to bottom. So use this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's their groundbreaking commission report that came out in November of 2020. This legislative session in 2022, they started taking some chunks of their recommendations and introduced a bill that would put setbacks in place, so you can't put this toxic wireless infrastructure on poles or fake trees or rooftops anywhere near our sensitive areas. And then also get the industry to do a registry of harm, so people have a place to go at one of our agencies, like the Department of Health and Human Services, to report harm that they have been exposed to by these radio frequency emissions. Dr. Kent Chamberlain was the chairman at the University of New Hampshire of their Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And he worked in industry on EMFs for 30 years. He's highly regarded in his field. He's highly published. He's been an editor on, like IEEE magazines and so forth. So very intelligent, very highly credentialed, and thought this was going to be a slam dunk. Of course, wireless is fine. He served on this commission and was just gobsmacked at how much the industry had persuaded our engineers to think that the creations they were making were safe. So God bless Dr. Kent Chamberlain. He's done a 180. And now he's out there educating others on what they found, what the biological risks are. And he did a presentation to show the scientific justification of this setback. And you can always access his slides to drill down into the science, the videos here. And then Frank Clegg also submitted testimony this session. He's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, who came in and flew in person back in 2019, but because of the pandemic, he couldn't leave his country. You can read his testimony that was read by Ken Wells, who also served on the commission. And these testimonies were all 3 minutes, so it's not a long document, but boy, is it direct and to the point. Wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. He goes on to say that wireless to and through the premises is what we should all be investing in today. And he gives great examples of even Tom Wheeler at the FCC, who used to be the chairman, is now saying fiber first, not wireless, fiber first. And giving examples like in Switzerland, they're already piloting fiber to the home. So we can do this. the industry just needs a nudge, because what they're doing is making money hand over fist. And until we make them stop, they're going to keep going down that road. So although they didn't outright pass this bill, because there was a whole new set of legislators on this Science, Tech, and Energy Committee, by the time we got them educated, their session was up. So they didn't outright vote this bill, but they had two choices. They could say, okay, we're done with this issue. We're not going to back up anything in the future. Or they can say, there's definitely something here and we need to do something about it. And that's what they did. Back in October, on October 6th, they voted 15-3 to introduce new legislation this session, that we need something to inform our local municipalities of what their rights are. Because industry comes in and says, oh, your hands are tied, there's nothing you can do. We're coming in and we're bringing this technology. Well, that's another package of disinformation from the industry. There is absolutely a lot that is protected under federal and New Hampshire law to empower our local municipalities to create zoning code that will prevent toxic infrastructure at close range. So that bill is being worked on. And then we're hoping there will be a second bill, because the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee wanted the public to be informed. So we're hoping there will be legislation introduced in January on that as well. So just for encouragement, examples, the industry comes in and tells our towns, oh no, this is only you guys, nobody else cares about this issue, which again, disinformation. If you go here, you will see at Americans for Responsible Technology, there are more than 150 groups all over the country working on this in their communities. So terrific resources to connect with others in your area. If they don't already exist, they've got a page in here on how to start a group. Excellent resources, invitations you can hand to your neighbors, the Generations Apt film that you can screen and invite folks into your living room and just learn together. And then don't be a single voice. That was my hard lesson learned. One voice is easily swept under the rug by busy public servants who have a lot on their plates today. But when you have a very calm, professional, well-informed group of citizens to take this forward, that's where you get traction. So use these incredible resources at Americans for Responsible Technology. But all over towns in Massachusetts, we have town after town doing things the right way. So look to that for hope and inspiration. We can share more on that with you. And even the city of Boston joined with towns all over the country to sue the FCC, saying that we believe the public, we don't think this is right. They didn't win that lawsuit, but let this serve as inspiration, because one lawsuit builds off of the next. So lots of great resources here in Burlington, Massachusetts. They came up with a small cell policy. They pulled people from all their town boards, formed a committee, looked at this issue, looked at the law, and said, how can we strengthen our local code to be as strong as it can be under the current law? And they did some pretty awesome things that were used as an example. There are templates that your town can use, and they rolled in some of the Burlington work to this template at Americans for Responsible Technology. They said, under the law, anything that you install in our town has to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So although they'll call these small cells small, they come with huge containers on the ground, like refrigerator-sized boxes or two, that are full of highly explosive contents. If that gets hit by a car, gets hit by lightning, there can be severe damages that your town's going to be liable for, because the industry has no insurance. So it's got to be ADA compliant. You can't block the sidewalk or anything with this. It's got to blend in with the environment to be aesthetically pleasing, because those rights are protected under the law. And then they went further in Burlington and said, and you can't just drop and run with this technology. If we approve an application for a small cell, you have to come back every single year and independently recertify that this equipment still meets FCC regulations. Well, and the industry has to pay for that recertification. Well, the attorney for Verizon was there when they ratified the Burlington small cell policy. And the attorney said, well, we respectfully withdraw our application for 7 small cells, because they knew full well they did not want to set precedent for an annual review or to pay to bring in an independent consultant to do that recertification. Because mind you, they're planning to put millions of these in all across the country. So this is something every one of our towns should be doing to deter the industry, because again, they want the path of least resistance. If you've got strong zoning bylaws or policies, they're going to move on to the next town, right? So after Burlington did this, we did a presentation for the Hanscom Area Town Select Board, which had 4 different towns that get together and talk about policy. After we did that presentation, Bedford, Lincoln, and also Andover had already done it. We're adopting some of the language and improving upon what Burlington had even done. So this can be done, folks, but nobody's going to take the ball and run with it. You and I have to do it in each of our towns and stay on top of it. That's the hard part, because our lives are already busy. But if we drop the ball, they're not going to pick it up again. But with persistence and facts and patience, and hopefully an open-hearted, kindness-centered effort, we can make definite inroads. So lots of things that we've done around Massachusetts, and this is happening everywhere. A grandmother in Easton, Connecticut figured this out, took it to her town. They had a doctor on their board, and they put a 5G moratorium in place until this technology can be proven safe. And they re-upped their moratorium this spring. They extended it again. Hawaii County did a resolution. It didn't have the legs of the law under it, but it sure as heck raised awareness. They banned 5G. And these types of actions are happening all over the world. And you can go right out to the Environmental Health Trust. And they are so gracious to give their time to track all of this to make it easy for you and I to reference. So our schools used to be a wonderful place where children would go to learn. Teachers spent all their time teaching. Now, when you talk to our teachers and ask them how much time is spent on behavior management, how much time is spent getting sick kids to the nurse's office, how many times are we having to bring in professionals in the guidance office, in the psychotherapy areas to take care of these poor kids who are falling apart. We should not be radiating our children in schools or on our school grounds. It's interesting to look at this 3-part expose that Nellie Bowles at the New York Times did several years ago. Silicon Valley executives know what's going on. They are sending their children to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless, no technology, because they know a child's brain does not best develop in the shallows of a screen. It best develops through meaningful, researched, evidence-based curriculum delivered through loving adults, teachers, their parents, their peers, and their natural environment. So Silicon Valley executives have taken it so far as to make their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And here they push that 21st century classroom in to all of our schools. As I said, there's solutions for everything. And Patty and Doug Wood, who are recipients of an award from the Environmental Protection Agency for the good works that they've done on schools and other areas to protect children. They now have a project called Tech Safe Schools, which is a national program that you and I and everybody we know should be reaching out to them to say, thank you so much for offering your resources to send a letter to my schools to open this conversation. So if you go out to Tech Safe Schools, they will send a packet to your schools, and then you and your friends get to follow up and make sure that we address this in our schools and teach them the health risks, the legal risks that our schools are assuming for radiating the students and staff. And most importantly, how do we go from where we are, do the gap analysis, and remediate? So all these tools are right here, easily accessible at Tech Safe Schools. And then with a great shout out to the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition. they have worked with others to develop curriculum. So we have age-appropriate curriculum to teach safe technology in the schools. And just this quarter, Dr. Alexia McKnight, who's a radiologist, she's a veterinary radiologist. She specializes in equine or horses. She got really sick when smart meters were mounted on her home, and it took her a while, but she figured it out. And then her kids' schools were asking for speakers at their health and wellness professional development day. So Dr. McKnight and I did 4 presentations last month throughout the day and taught a lot of their educators about this issue. And so we have a good example to share with your schools of professional development that we could bring in to help get everybody on the same page. And then, as I mentioned, our little nonprofit has a schools and families course that we've been moving it to a new platform, and we're about ready to bring it back online. But we literally have a half-hour training module done that could train the entire school in a half an hour, kicks out a certificate at the end to turn in for your compliance tracking at school. So for the older kids, the mature kids, and the teachers and the staff and the administrators, we've got this. But it has to come from you guys. You're the ones who have to bring it through to your communities. And then at the Environmental Health Trust, they've got a ton of resources, 1 and 2 pagers, posters, postcards that you can mine to hand out. Maryland was the first public school or the public state level agency to recommend hardwiring our schools. And we think they're going to have even more meaningful actions coming out very shortly. And then the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools does Green School certification. And with great thanks to Dr. Antonia Stein, she worked with them to create a module on low EMF best practices. So our schools don't know it, but they've got all these great resources that they can tap into immediately to start moving the needle to safe technology. And when the pandemic hit, the Mediterranean country of Cyprus over by Greece, they came out with a set of safety protocols for accessing technology safely, remotely. Number 1 is hardwire it and turn off the radiation. If you can't do it, at least create distance. They walk us through this. They tell us by age how much time a child should be spending in front of a screen. So, we've got all of this to help our schools come up to speed. Professional solutions, here's that medical conference that's available to register until next June 15th. It has to be completed by July 1st for 24.5 continuing education credits. Otherwise, the videos will still be available into the future of 2023 for anybody to just go get the education. Dr. Cindy Russell, Dr. Joel Moskowitz, and others have built a very highly credible website that your healthcare teams can be sent to at any point in time. And then for our engineers, physicists, technologists, architects, when we did that Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institutes of Health back in 2018, they did a call for papers. And Frank Clegg, who was on our panel for that, retired president of Microsoft Canada, he organized other scientists, doctors, building biologists, and other experts to produce a paper to submit, and they got that peer reviewed and published for building science and radio frequency radiation. What makes smart and healthy buildings? This is an excellent paper to share with the professions and with our towns to teach us how to get to the end solution. Again, here's Jeremy's TED Talk. And then I have a page on my website for engineers and physicists, because we want to look at, step in their shoes. What are they up against? What have they heard from industry? What rules govern their work? What systems do they have to affect change through? So lots of resources for everybody to learn from where they are. So for you and I, if you're not a do-it-yourselfer, there is a whole profession called building biologists, and these are highly trained, certified experts who can be hired to come into your home, your office, your school, help you get the gap analysis done, do a report and show you what you're exposed to. And they can do not only the radio frequency, but the other man-made forms of electromagnetic fields, of electric fields, magnetic fields, and electromagnetic fields. So you can hire somebody to come in and do that. We're very excited that we have a new building biologist getting his final certification this month to service the Northeast. And we'll be putting out a press release on that as soon as he has his full certification under his belt. There's also the award-winning film Generation Zapped. It's now available on Amazon Prime. Our public libraries often have streaming services with Canopy with a K, or Hoopla, so that you can watch this for free and invite your friends and neighbors in to do a screening with you. That's how you build education at the grassroots level. And then once you have a good, well-informed group, then together you start working with your town, and then you can't be dismissed. You have to stay on it, but get a screening of Generation Zapped. It's still one of the very best ways to educate on this. And Bert Wolf on PBS has already done 2 episodes, thanks to Camilla Reese and Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe and others who worked with him on that. That's pretty mainstream, right? And then our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have everything you need here to open this conversation credibly with your town. So look at their advocates toolkit. And again, we have to set the example. The kids in our world are watching and emulating everything that we do. So start learning, start taking measures, find the courage to do the right thing where technology is concerned, and model good behavior. I love this little poster that was put out called 50 Ways to Take a Break. It reminds us what we used to do with our time before somebody convinced us it was okay to be in front of a screen all the time. You know, create art, create music, get out in the woods, go for a hike, go help a neighbor, go play with a pet, you know, go volunteer somewhere, go dancing, you know, meditate, take time for yourself, rest, go light a candle, you know, all these great things that can help us to center again and to have fun and to replenish ourselves without technology. The earth prescription, some of you may already know about earthing or grounding. This was a new concept for me, but apparently every living thing is meant to be connected to the earth because there's an exchange of electrons that comes from the earth's natural energy that feeds up into our bodies to help regulate all of our biological systems. Once we started walking on rubber-soled shoes instead of pure leather, once we started putting rubber sneakers on our cars, once we started living off the ground, we lost literally our connection to the earth. And so Dr. Frank Sinatra and Clint Ober wrote the first book on earthing and show all the science. And I read it and it made a lot of sense. And then I went, yeah, but now I live in the Northeast where I can't be out barefoot 6 months out of the year. So I was kind of stymied how to do grounding when I literally can't be on the ground. And then just poor Dr. Conover, just as the pandemic was hitting, Dr. Laura Conover came out with this, I love her book, The Earth Prescription. She takes grounding through each one of the 4 seasons and offers dozens of ways that you and I can ground naturally without having to take our shoes off. Like, who knew? If you're out for a walk and you touch the high water content part of a tree, like the leaves or the needles or the flowers or the bushes, you are automatically, instantly grounded through the connection from that living organism in the ground. Even if your pets are on the ground in the snow, rub the not so furry snout or the ears, and you are instantly grounded through your pet if your pet is on a transmitting part of the ground. You don't want to do hot top because the black top has a petroleum product in it that seals off those electromagnetic transmissions. So concrete is just sand and water. That is conductive. And, you know, there are little meters you can buy if you want to go out and do experiments for yourself. But this is a great book for just reminding us how to reconnect naturally for all that clean, free, healing energy. So what can we do, guys? I know this is a lot, but I want you to have a good package like this that you can take to your friends, to your loved ones, to yourself, to your spouses, because it can be a very contentious issue under our own roof until we're patient and kind and just teach it. Here's what you can do for your town. The Centers for Disease Control already has something up on their website for radiation. It's called the ALARA principle. Our goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And they say with any radiation, And they're talking about ionizing radiation, which is X-rays, the sun, gamma rays, and all of that. But it all applies to man-made non-ionizing radiation. They have 3 tenets. 1, reduce the amount of time that you're exposed. 2, create as much distance as you can. And 3, shield if you can't get away from it. Same thing that will help you with wireless radiation. So let's all march to the ALARA principle. And when our towns investigate, use these resources for municipal leaders that we've laid out here, and make sure we underscore the need to differentiate between the industry priorities of putting all Wi-Fi all the time everywhere and making money to the public's priorities. This free resource called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, was written by Dr. Timothy Sheckley in conjunction with Camilla Reese and this Policy Institute out of Washington, D.C. And they outline for our towns very clearly, not just the health risks, but all the other reasons why wireless is a raw deal for our towns. We need to future-proof and have sustainable, hardwired fiber optics to and through the premises, not these small cells that they want to throw up on a pole. They need to take that fiber connection directly to the premises, and we can teach them how to do that. And it's always critical to measure, because the industry will say, oh, it's within the FCC guidelines, it's all fine, which is true, it is within the FCC guidelines, but it is not fine. We have to measure to biological effects, and our building biology friends can show us what those are. We should be under 1,000 outdoors and under 10 indoors. And in our sleeping spaces, ideally under 0.1 microwatts per square meter. And that's what I have. I bought a shielded canopy because my house is on a hill, and in the offing, there's a cell tower out there that pulses. So I get great sleep every night because I don't function very well without it. So next steps. We know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose. You're going to need a little bit of time to digest it, but don't wait too long, because there is no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. So our goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who oversaw the National Toxicology Program when she headed up the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, she has told us recently that yes, there are captured agencies, but yes, there are still some good public servants at the federal level. They need for us to empower them from the local and the state efforts. So we need to do our jobs. As a citizen, it's our jobs to teach our public. So tell everybody you know to come to one of our free education sessions. You can always go to the events page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and we will have the current invitation up here. I just taught myself how to do a QR code. And so we put that on there so people can go to our page and register. And then we can be brought in to do community education forums. The health board out at Tri-Town Health Department in Lee, Massachusetts, which services 3 different towns. They brought me in with John Mirren of Hilltown Health, and we did a forum for them. The Hanscom Area Town Select Board brought us in, and then those towns strengthened their bylaws. So we're here to help, right? Train the schools and the staff. All these incredible resources. I can be brought in for hand-holding and teaching. And then start where you are. What do you do on a day-to-day basis? Who do you work for? What professional associations might you be a part of? They're almost always looking for speakers to talk about cutting-edge things. This is us. We're here to help you do that. So every town should recognize that technology is here to stay. So they need to be forming townwide tech safety committees. They should be taught that they cannot let the industry just push in these smart meters. Every town should have an opt-out and be formulating plans to transition to every technology being hardwired. No more of this wireless infrastructure. And then again, get your bylaws, because federal public policy is going to take years. You can start changing your local public policy today. And tell your towns, don't be shy about engaging a professional who does this day in and day out. Somebody like Andrew Campanelli, who used to work for industry until he figured out what they were doing to the public. He now represents towns and citizens. And I think his flat fee is $8,500. He will look at your zoning bylaw. He will tell you what your state allows, and then he will tell you where your gaps are, and he can rewrite your zoning code. It's short money. $8,500 is not going to break the bank for our towns, but it will save them a lot of legal risk by getting their zoning as strong as it can be under current law. And most of our town attorneys are not experts in this, and they should be the first to tell you that. So for today, hardwire and get rid of as much of this wireless radiation as you can, and you might find that you sleep better. I've been told children's behavior issues calm way down. People with autism have told us in their families that when they get the EMFs right and hardwired and take care of the dirty electricity too, that they see huge gains in communication abilities of people with autism. So reduce your exposures, start by noticing what is radiating, do your gap analysis, and then start with baby steps. We know this is overwhelming, but do what you can do one step at a time. Most importantly, tonight, create a sleep sanctuary and get rid of as much of that radiation overnight so your body has a chance of repairing. And then start migrating to Ethernet cables and adapters. Keep everything in airplane mode as a rule. Set alarms on your cell phone, check in every half hour, see who's looking for you, put it back in airplane mode, then pick it up when it's not transmitting and compose your responses. Set it away from you, go active for 30 seconds, send, receive, go right back into airplane mode and forward your phone calls to your landline when you're not on the go. And then again, our friends at Environmental Health Trust, look at these beautiful resources they put together. You can print these out, hang them up around where you are, hand them out to your doctors, hand them out to your nurses, your firefighters. We have all sorts of resources for you here and at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So we're not big fans of reinventing the wheel. I've spent years building out this website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So we are inviting everybody to come to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. We have a Facebook page, which Deb Hodgson of New Hampshire for Safe Technology has been so gracious to help us keep updated. And they have a New Hampshire for Safe Technology website as well. So you can connect with us there. You can email us directly at newhampshireforsafetechnology@gmail.com or MA4 safetech@gmail.com. So I will go ahead and stop our screen share right now. And if Deb or Lori would like to check in with the chat and let us know if there's anybody asking any questions, we would be more than honored. But I'd like to give a shout out to some of the good folks on the line here. Dan Forbes is with us. He is the journalist who broke open the story when the Oregon Health Authority failed on their mission to protect school children. And he did the deep dive into the Freedom of Information Act requests and did some amazing journalistic reporting to show that we have captured agencies at all levels. So Dan, thank you for joining us. I know you joined us a little late. If you have any questions, we'd be honored to ask or to answer anything we can. Peggy Barton, thank you so much. You've been in touch with me this week. You're working with your local community groups to try and get an education session set up in there. Josephus, I know that you are a scientist who works on sleep issues, or I'm sorry, Joe Soleil. So we're so very grateful to everybody who's doing what they can from where they are. And Gail, I know you've been very active, and Allison, you're working in Harvard Square to try and get somebody to come in and shield your apartment where you've gotten very sick. So all of you are being the change that we need to see in our world. And I hope that others will take inspiration from your actions. So yeah, Deb, are you up for, I know you're sick and you should be back on the couch today. Do you want to run Q&A, or would you like to ask Lori to do that?
Sure. There's only one question so far from Peggy Barton about cell phones. Do iPhones or Androids emit less radiation?
Um, they're all different and they all have multiple antennas. They're all not good. I don't know, the way that they rate those is by specific absorption of the radiation, and they give a rating on that. So you could go for one with a lower SAR rating, but it's really up to you to learn how to use your device safely and turn off all the antennas that you're not using. And that's the easiest way to reduce the exposures. But there is also a company called Mudita. It's M as in Michael, U, D as in David, I, T as in Thomas, A. They're out of Europe, and Mudita is coming up with a Mudita Pure phone that deliberately doesn't have all these bells and whistles on it. So you're welcome to go out to Mudita and look to see what they are doing. And if anybody practices Buddhism or meditation, they may know that Mudita is a word that they selected out of those principles. I forget what it means, but it's like coming at things through heart-centered openness and healing and all of that good stuff.
Okay, we have several more questions. Which meter has newer technology, the Acoustimeter or Safe and Sound Pro?
The Safe and Sound Pro 2. And if I forgot to mention it, I apologize. But if you go out to globalemf.net, that's Dr. Magda Havis's website where she's asking people to be citizen scientists. If you reach out to them, Rob Metzinger, who makes the Safe and Sound Pro 2, is partnering with Dr. Havis up in Canada. And he said anybody who agrees to help be a citizen scientist for her projects there, he'll offer a discount. And it usually retails for $385. And when I took advantage of that, I think I paid a couple of years ago, $308. So it's almost a third or a quarter savings there if you want to reach out at globalemf.net.
All right, next question. I have Ethernet. Do I still need to shield the router?
If you have Ethernet, that's great. You should measure what's happening with your router. Mine would send it off into the red zone. So what I did is I called up my internet service provider and I said, I have chosen hardwired technology throughout my house, but that router for my triple play for phone, internet, and cable, it's red radiation. I said, what do I do? And he said, oh, that's easy. So when I called my internet service provider, they said, just sit down at your computer. And I went, really? I said, yeah. And they walked me through how to get into my online account. And when they got me in there, there was a wireless setting. And I just had to go into the wireless setting and turn off the 2.4 gigahertz antenna. And then I had to turn off the 5 gigahertz antenna. And 5 gigahertz is not to be confused with 5G. 5G means generation. 5 gigahertz means it's sending 5 billion cycles per second radiation transmissions. So I just went off. I hit the apply button and it gave me a message saying, you realize you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off, right? And I went, yeah, thank you. And then I measured again and I had a nice clean radio silence. So that's how you address it. I will put out a warning. My husband we were with Verizon at that time. My husband saw a better deal financially with Comcast.
Yep.
And so he called up Comcast and said, we like this deal, but my wife's going to want to be sure that if we let you guys install your equipment here, that there's going to be no radiation. And the guy said, oh, no problem. Our technician will take care of it. So the technician comes to my house. They swap out. We've got 3 boxes around our house. They swap out the router. And I say, okay, humor me. And I go down to the basement to our utility closet where the router is. And I turn on my meter and it's flaming red again. And I said, okay, you got the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas turned off, right? And the guy says, yeah. And I said, what about, I've heard you guys are putting public hotspots on the routers in our private homes so you can throw signal out to the curb so everybody driving by can keep their Comcast signal up. I said, did you turn off the 2.5 hotspot and the 5 gigahertz hotspot? And he said, actually, yeah, I did. And I said, so why is it still radiating my family? And he said, I don't know. So he worked down there. He called his tech support. They didn't know. He called his supervisor. They didn't know. And when I had been at the medical conference, the first one in 2019 out in California, I was sitting at a table with a couple of experts and I overheard them talking about additional antennas in the routers. So I reached out to my friend in Silicon Valley and I said, hey, what was that other antenna? And he said, oh, they're now equipping the routers with a wireless home security antenna. Whether you have a wireless home security system or not, that antenna is transmitting into your living space 24/7 and all your neighbors too. So that night, my husband was gracious to run down to the tech store and just buy our own router. He just bought a Netgear box. And the next day, when the Comcast installer came back with his supervisor, I said, look, guys, I think I solved the problem. There's another antenna in here that your frontline tech support does not know about. I was told you have to ask for a tier 2 tech support person, which will get you to an engineer who from their end can then turn off that antenna remotely. And I said, I can't take that risk that as you guys do updates during the night, that you're just going to flip all this radiation back on. And they said, yeah, gosh, we get it. We get what you're saying. And I said, as a show of good faith, will you do me a favor? Will you just install my router? And they were so gracious, and they did. I taught them something and they were very grateful. So you have to be very careful, and having a meter to measure the radiation is the only way. And for some, that's an expensive proposition. There's like a baby Safe and Sound Pro that's just come out. It's called like the Classic 2 instead of the Pro 2. And you can get it that one for less than $200. And maybe you go in on with your friends and neighbors, or you do what we did in our library and we got the town to pay to have this on loan. And it's not a stretch anymore because now all our libraries have a library of things. I went the other day, they actually have a projector I could borrow, so all of our libraries are doing these libraries of things. You could ask your library to buy a radio frequency detection meter. And when the energy companies were rolling out those swirly CFL light bulbs that, as it turns out, throw off a really bad form of man-made electromagnetic field, one of their marketing tools was to give every one of our libraries, at least in my area, this nice little case that had a kilowatt meter in it. And the campaign was so citizens would take out that kilowatt meter from the library, take it home, screw in your old incandescent light bulb and measure how much energy that uses, and then screw in this new fancy CFL light bulb and see how much money you're going to save, right? Follow the dollar, strikes again. So I knew our library already had a system in place to put a meter on loan, and that's where I got the idea. So others around the country are emulating this library program to put a radio frequency detection meter on loan. And I would highly recommend you go after the Safe and Sound Pro 2. It's the same price range as the Acoustimeter, but the Safe and Sound Pro 2 will enable everybody in your community to take measurements and put them in Dr. Havas's database.
All right, next question. How do we find local electricians to hardwire our homes?
That's a great question. Do one of you have insights to share on that?
I don't. Mine was my husband.
Okay, so Lori?
Well, I would say it wouldn't be an electrician so much as a tech person, somebody who does computer work. I know there are 2 people in Keene that could do it for you if you don't want to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And their specialty is computer tech work for private citizens or businesses.
Excellent suggestion. Yeah, and you don't even have to go into this with your electrician. If you just tell your electrician, I want Ethernet jacks put in this room, and this room, they'll just do it. That's what they do.
Oh, that's different. I was thinking of just the Ethernet cable hookups, but if you want a jack in the wall because you don't have a telephone jack, that's a different story.
Yeah, but that's a great suggestion too, is to look to tech companies to come in and help you get all situated if you want. They may or may not understand EMFs, and you can certainly refer them to one of our education sessions here or send them out to the Building Biology Institute or elsewhere if they really want to get an education. And it could be a great selling point for their businesses if they're offering hardwired solutions. Great, thank you.
All right, next question. Do noise reducing headphones emit RFR?
You have to measure.
Right. This
Yeah,
is,
if it's
this is easy.
wireless, if it's wireless, it's
Yeah.
transmitting radiation to your brain. That's the bottom line. But you could also get noise reducing ones that are hardwired, plug them into a device that's not transmitting, and then you have both technologies safely.
Here's an easy one. How do you turn off antenna in cell phones?
Ta-da! Who wants to take that one?
Well, for iPhones, you go to settings and you tap each one of them. Airplane mode, Wi-Fi, hotspot, and Bluetooth. You just tap each one of them off. Lots of times people think that their Wi-Fi is off because will say not connected. But that just means that it hasn't connected to a network, but it's still radiating. So everything has to say off. So you just go into your settings and turn every one of those off.
Mhm.
It's that easy.
What about the locator antenna?
Well, I've turned off everything. I don't get messages or anything. So
Yeah, and if you
Yeah.
didn't know any better and you upgraded to a 5G phone, then you should probably be looking for those antennas for
yes.
that too and turning those off. Great questions, you guys.
All right. So let me see here. All right. The next one. When you buy your own router, how do you know how to turn off the Wi-Fi? Did you have to call the company or did you buy one without Wi-Fi?
We bought one that had a button on it that we could press to turn it
Yeah.
off. And then, so, we're an active household. I had a couple of kids living at home at the time and they meant well, but they'd forget, they'd turn it on to do something. And my rule is you can turn it on for a second and then turn it right back off. And then I would be feeling like, uh-oh, something doesn't feel right. And I'd go down and look and the darn thing was still on. So I put a note. Some charity had sent me a little notepad with a Halloween scary house theme on it. And so I just wrote a note. I said, if you don't remember to turn this thing back off, I'm taking your cell phone from you. So do whatever is in your toolkit. As a mom, you might need to pull some punches here and there, but we all just need reminders because it's invisible. So get one that you can turn off and monitor it, make sure it stays off.
I just wanted to say something for people who might think they're all set. First of all, just like Cece said, you really need to measure, because I had my house at 0 for several years. And then all of a sudden I felt sick. So I got my meter and followed it all the way up to my office, which was flaming red. And what I had discovered happened was there was a Microsoft update overnight and it turned my Bluetooth back on. So crazier things happen. And so you have to be vigilant for sure. That has happened to me 3 times now.
Oh gosh, Deb,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Just when you think you're ahead of
I
the
know.
Yeah, but in extreme cases, I know a gentleman who's an engineer and his sweetheart got really sick when the smart meter went on, irreparably sick. She's pretty much a shut-in and he takes just loving care of her. She can function in the house because, but she can't even go near electric appliances anymore. It's gotten that bad. So what he does is he invested in 3 of these meters. And one of the benefits of the Safe and Sound Pro 2 is it has a port in it where you can use like a phone charger that fits this port, and you can leave it plugged in and leave it on all the time. So if anything starts transmitting in your house, you'll be alerted right away. Because remember, these things make noise.
Right.
And it'll really start screaming if something goes off. Okay.
All right. Another question. Is the RFR meter enough, or do you need the other meters measuring electromagnetic fields also?
Yeah, it depends. If you become
Right.
electromagnetically ill, you will want to do everything in your power to keep yourself safe. With the other forms of electromagnetic fields, the man-made ones that come off of the wiring in our walls, in commercial builds, all those wires are shielded with aluminum liner. a foil liner. So here, at least here in the US, that wiring is already shielded, but they didn't put that in our code for residential builds. So you may need to shield yourself from the emanation that's coming 6 to 8 feet into the room from those regular old electrical wires that are in your wall, because that can make people sick too. If you go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and you go to our events page, sometimes when some of the experts join us for these Q&A sessions like we're having right now, we'll put a little link that goes directly to what somebody was, sharing with us. And there's one in there from Eric Windheim, who's a building biologist, and he's also one of the instructors at the Building Biology Institute. And Eric said when he goes in and is hired by somebody to go in and assess their environment, he shuts everything off, everything, turn off all the power and start from zero. And then one by one, he'll turn things on in isolation to see what's having an effect. And he said he was in a house one day and nobody but the mom knew he was there. Shut everything off. And from a back bedroom, this young man, 22 years old, who's autistic, comes out and he goes, "What just happened? The pressure in my head is gone." And that was just from killing everything. And I can't remember if it was that house or another one, but the pool pump was throwing a huge dose of dirty electricity onto all the wires of the house. And that was a contributing factor to the health issues that family was having. So if you go to EMF or electromagnetic fields, go to emfanalysis.com. That's Jeremy Johnson's website. And he has a page of recommendations. So for those who are electrically sensitive, he has lived this nightmare and he's an engineer. So he goes through things very systematically. And he has great recommendations for the meters that he knows and trusts. So I trust Jeremy's recommendations. So if you go to EMF analysis, you can check that out there. Oh, poor Deb's caught in a coughing fit. Lori's on the phone. I will check the chat and see if there are other questions. Okay, I think those are all of them. If anybody would like to raise their hand with any other questions or comments, Dan, I don't know if you're actually listening with us still, but if you have any updates on what's happening in the world of journalism, on helping our society to learn about this risk and what we can do, please feel free to unmute yourself and chime in with a hello. Okay, looks like he might be tending to other business, but thank you so much, everybody. We're so grateful that you took the time to join us today. Please take the flyer, the invitation that we've got on our events page, and put it wherever you can in your community, because if we don't fix this, nobody's coming to our rescue. Joe, did you want to unmute yourself and say something?
I want to say, I think there's a lot more work to be done on possible impacts on sleep. Mm-hmm. As you know, I'm in the Division of Sleep Medicine at Harvard, and I never hear this discussed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important. I get so many requests from people who can't figure out what it is they're doing wrong. They're not sleeping. They're trying to follow all the recommendations, and yet they're not sleeping. So I think there's
Joe, send them our way. Get that flyer in their hands. Send it out to your whole distribution list every month to get people who are reaching out to you. And then from where you are at Harvard, bring me in and let's co-host a talk. Let's educate all your colleagues.
I would love to make that happen. We'll be in touch.
You know where to find me.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so I actually met Joe in Cambridge when their wire and conduit group at their municipal level was being seduced by industry. I was asked to come in and we all sat around a big table, horseshoe table, and we were all able to give our comments. And afterwards, I met with the industry guys out on the street, and they were nice enough people, but they said, we're just doing our jobs. We can't fix this. It has to come from higher ups. So we have to make our towns aware, strengthen our bylaws, educate our friends and loved ones and neighbors. And this is how change happens. So Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join in today and let us know how we can help. Have a good night, everybody. Deb, get some rest, feel better. Lori, thanks for doing everything up in New Hampshire you guys are doing.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.